Hi, and welcome to the Alberta Library Trustees Association webinar, Should I Vote for this Budget? One of the most important things that library boards do throughout the year is to adopt a budget that's going to guide the library through the next year and determine how money is spent. The Libraries Act says that before December 1st each year, there has to be a budget prepared, and it has to estimate how much money is going to be required in the coming year to operate the library. This budget and the estimate of money then is sent to your municipal council. If you're fortunate, you get to present it yourself, and then the council either approves or doesn't approve the amount of money you've asked for. As board members, you do have a responsibility called a fiduciary responsibility, which is a requirement to act with a certain level of trust. What that means is you can't just pass the budget without reading it, looking at it, and trying to be informed about what's going on. So what this webinar is aimed at is helping you feel more informed when you're looking at a budget, feel more informed when you have to vote on a motion about the budget. So we understand that budgets can be confusing. There's lots of things in there that people don't face in their daily lives. There's things that happen that may or may not appear in the budget. But at the end of the day, it is the board's responsibility to understand the budget and to pass it. The budget might be developed, in your case, by a committee of the board. It might be developed by your library manager. But at the end of the day, it's the board that has to approve it. What is the budget, though? What is this thing? It's essentially a planning document. It's your plan of how you're going to spend your money to achieve the goals of the library that you've laid out in your plan of service. It's your way of checking that the money that's being spent and the resources that are being invested are actually working towards achieving your goals. And you need to understand it well enough to explain it and defend it to council. So what we have today is a conversation between a library trustee, Hank Smit, who's the chair of the board of Hinton Municipal Library, and also the chair of the board of Yellowhead Regional Library System, and Renee LeBlanc, who is an accountant and is also the finance manager at the Alberta Library. So it's a conversation. They're going to talk about what are the issues around approving a budget. So over to you, Hank and Renee.
Well, first of all, I need to reiterate a little bit what Margaret said there too, is that the budget is a planning document, and we do need to bring it in front of our councils, and they could say yes or no to it as well. So we really need to know what's in our budgets before we really present them to council, so that one, we don't look like fools, and number two is that we can actually, if they ask us a question at council, that we can actually answer them with a relative ease, and that's a big thing. Again, hello Renee, and welcome to this nice little fireline chat that we're doing right now. I have a question here to start us off, and how much detail should the budget have?
Hi Hank, hi Margaret, and thank you for this opportunity to join you here today and answer your questions. The budget should have enough detail in it so that you can understand where the money is being allocated. You don't really need more information than what is necessary for ensuring that there is a plan.
Okay, does that mean that we should really be counting every paper clip and pen that the library uses, as well as ink for their inkjet or for their printers? Or
that's a good question. That really leads into the concept of materiality. So depending on the size of your library, the materiality will change. If your library is a very large library, you don't need to go into that much detail. But if you have a smaller library, more detail might be better. But you don't need to know how many stamps you've purchased during the year. That's generally not as much detail as a budget should have. But there should be sufficient notes within the budget so that the readers of the budget understand where the money is going. And numbers should be rounded so that the budget is easier to read.
What does that mean? Does that mean that, say, if I got $3.59, should I put that to which way do I go, and then which expense or revenue should that be going up or down with?
A general rule is to round expenses up to the nearest dollar or nearest $5 and to round revenue down. And that's just so that you can be more conservative in estimates. And so for a larger library, that might be rounding up or down to $50 or $100, but for a smaller library, maybe just $5.
I see. Thank you very much. How do we assess a budget?
Well, really, in assessing a budget, it's always good to start with the plan of service of the library. So as Margaret had mentioned before, what are your goals for this year? Where is the money that is going to help you meet those goals?
That's amazing. That's good. A little bit more about a plan of services. In the business community, that would be more along the lines of a strat plan. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. A strategic plan or a plan of service. I believe the plan of service has to be supplied to the Public Library Services branch each year. So that's a really good place to start. Another item to think about when you're assessing the budget is to check your policies and that refer to items in the budget to ensure that you're following policy as well.
And just another answer on that, policies do need to be submitted as well to Public Services Library Branch, as according to the funding that we get from them as well. So again, both these items are major portions of what libraries need to have. The plan of service is definitely, that's a different way of thinking. So if we think that our budgets are just nothing but numbers in front of us, they're numbers that help support us to follow the guide that we created. And so by making sure that your money is allocated in the way that it flows from that document is sometimes very hard. I have to admit, I don't want to be an accountant when that happens. So again, that's a very tricky way. But again, if you do it like that, you seem to it makes it easier to make judgment calls on the budget, I think, anyways.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And you need to make sure that you're meeting your commitments to any funders, especially donors or project with regards to project grants. So it's important to not only look at your plan of service and your policies, but also any grants that you may have and the rules that they have in those grants for how funds can be spent.
Okay, we have reserves at our library, but I don't really understand what they are or what they can be used for. Can you help us out, Renee?
Certainly I can. That's a very good question. If you think of reserves like a savings account that you may have personally, that may help. So reserves are really a contingency or an amount that's set aside for a specific purpose. So you're either saving for something for a specific purpose in the future, maybe that is capital improvements, or you could be setting money aside for purchases of equipment, things like that. And reserves can also be set aside for covering deficits within the operating fund. So operating reserves, generally in an operating fund, which is the fund that you would use for your everyday revenue and expenses that go through in the course of a year. If you have a surplus, that surplus would go to an operating reserve. And if you have a deficit, it would be funded from an operating reserve. That's just one example of how a reserve works.
Okay, say we're in a really weird type of budget scenario with COVID happening right now. And say that we have a really large in a capital reserve, but we need to move it from the capital to an operational reserve. Is that possible?
Certainly that's possible. You can move money from reserves according to policy, and generally within policy, that would mean that a motion would have to be made by the board of directors to move money from one reserve to another reserve.
Okay, I like that a lot. Okay. Oh, okay. The next question I have is, what do I need to know about specific lines in the budget?
That's a very good question. Specific lines in the budget should be looked at and compared to the prior year. Generally, when budgets are presented, they present the current year budget and the prior year budget. So you should be looking for numbers that are either bigger or smaller than the prior year, and if there's a big variance, and questioning why there's a variance there. You can also look at specific line items within the budget that are larger than all the rest of them, and typically that would be salaries. And you can ask questions with regards to salaries, that if WCB is included, or if cost of living increases are included, a COLA increase, or if benefits are included in the salary figure. Those are good questions.
Well, actually, in here in Hinton, we actually have to do multi-year budgets, which means we have to do we don't only show last year's, but the next year's plus 2 more years on top of that. And I believe they're doing that more and more within municipalities, so that they can get an objective line of how these things increase. And so, yeah, it's definitely a little bit of extra work that definitely has to be done by our library manager to bring that forward. But again, we just had that meeting, so that's why it's so fresh in my mind. Okay. So again, the bigger and smaller. So like last year, like for us, of course, anything with having to do with paying our employees at the library, normally those costs increase depending on how many people, again, your step scale for them, as well as their benefits and the such. And so also we have a weird one here in Hinton, which is a union environment, which means that we're kind of stuck in what we can do with that line. Is there, I guess the question is there a certain percentage you would say that would be definitely, we should be looking into it? So if our costs increase by 3 to 4% over year for salaries, is that within line? Or if should it be more or less?
That's a good question, and it really depends upon the library. So for example, I would agree that an increase of over a certain percentage would definitely require some questions being asked, but it's important to note that not too much information can be provided in the budget with regards to salaries, apart because you can't provide information on individuals in the budget about salaries. So it generally has to be just an aggregate number, but you should certainly be questioning if the percentage increase makes sense. And within the budget, there should be some notes that would provide you with what percentage increase it is overall. And if that percentage increase is more than what has happened in the past, when you're comparing to the prior year, then that would certainly be a question to ask. And as you're going forward, looking at your multi-year budget, does that percentage, is it the same percentage each year, or is it a different percentage? So that would be something to look at as well.
Okay. And that's, and if I could interject, that actually is one that you better be very prepared to explain to municipal council, because they are likely to zero in on that number if it's going up and ask you what's going on. So that's where the understanding, so you can explain it, is going to be really critical. Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's perfectly fine. You're one of the experts there, Margaret. Thank you very much for that. You know something? What is a budget note, and what are they used for? You kind of led into that, so you might as well complete it. So.
Oh, of course, yes, I did kind of lead into that, didn't I? Yes, budget notes are for the readers of the budget, so that you can have a better understanding of where the numbers are coming from, what they're made up of. Notes need to be comprehensive, and they need to include assumptions that were made for the budget preparation.
That's great. Again, who should be reading these budget notes, and should we have them as part of our presentation to councils?
Certainly the board should be definitely reading the budget notes so that they have a full understanding of what the budget is made up of, and then the notes should help answer any questions that may arise when they're being presented. Not everyone will necessarily read them, but they should provide information for the readers so that you can answer any questions that you have. But the notes should be provided to the board and also anyone that the budget is being presented to.
I see. How about I know we're talking about personal information when we talk about salaries. So again, that when Margaret had one, we have to be able to explain it to our councils what's going on, but we don't need to go into that great detail, especially when it comes to privacy legislation. How do we manage that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the ways that that can be managed is within the budget notes. You could note how many full-time equivalent staff you have. And so you're not providing any personal information on anyone, which you can't. And you couldn't, for example, provide information that perhaps an employee was provided with a retirement package or so forth. But you could just say that the FTE or full-time equivalent has changed year over year and provide that number. And then readers of the statements, or when you're answering a question, they would understand that the overall salary figure has either gone up or down because the staffing numbers have changed, but there's no individual information.
I see. That's really good, because we want to make sure that we can follow our FOIP procedures. That's for sure, which should be in our policies, by the way, right, Margaret? So, okay. Okay. Again, we don't have flexibility in our revenue. We don't make like a business does. Do we really need to worry about asking questions about our budget?
Yes, you should always question everything in the budget, including revenues. So municipal funding, for example, generally appears as a grant or a specific amount of revenue. And again, you need to make sure that whatever grants you're receiving, if there's any restrictions on how those funds can be spent, that's noted in the budget. And you have to ensure that all revenue from various sources are included in the budget as well.
I see. Well, what about like other areas that the revenue that we come in? Like sometimes we have a Friends of the Library, or we do room rentals.
Yes, so when you're looking at revenue from Friends of the Library or room rentals, one of the things that board members should look at is, are those expectations reasonable? So is the revenue reasonable in comparison to the last year? That would be something to look at. And what is the revenue based on? So again, in the notes to the financial statements, there should be some notes about the assumptions on how that revenue was calculated.
Okay. A few years ago, we got rid of library card membership fees, and that was a definite dent to our revenue stream for a while, but it again balanced it out quite equally with other areas of revenue collection, like fines and stuff like that. That's important for budgets, especially when you're trying to present that in front of council and saying, yes, we're taking less money from our public, but we want more money from you. So again, the balance is definitely necessary. And so we definitely need to know what our budgets are like before moving forward and giving approval to spend the money for them. So thanks for that, Renee. Okay. Okay. Another question I have is, are there any costs that aren't in the budget that the board needs to know about before presenting?
Yes, that's a very good question. And one thing that's overlooked or can be overlooked. For example, if the municipality owns the building that the library resides in, but they don't charge you rent, that really needs to be included in the notes to the budget, because it's like a gift in kind. And so it should be disclosed. Also, a municipality can supply utilities for a library, and that needs to be included in the budget as well.
What about other areas that have come to mind for us is being in Hinton, and we're in part of Yellowhead County. Yellowhead County, that also gives us some revenue for dealing with county people that were within our district. So that's one area. Also, PLSB, to get funding for your library from that, is asks those questions as part of their form. But not every library puts them in there. I recommend that we do, so that we know what the library really costs your municipality. Yeah, because again, there's more to that here in Hinton too. They will do our HR for us as well and help us out with this, because the more combined services a library has with the town, is the less overall money needs to be spent by the library itself. And so there's always that balance between wanting your own way, and doing things together and being shared is also quite cost effective. So the balance needs to be there. Do you have anything to add to that, Renee?
No, that's a very good information.
Okay. Question again I have is, once the budget is approved, what do we do with it?
Well, Hank, it generally should be used to assess progress throughout the year. So throughout the year, as the board receives financial data, and whether that's monthly or quarterly, it should always be compared to the budget, so that you can compare your budget with your financial statements and see where things may have varied, or things always come up, and there's always changes throughout the year, but you want to make sure that you're keeping on track with your budget.
I see. So again, we have budget, meetings nearly every month. Should the budget document be placed in there with certain percentages of what was spent on each one? Is that usually a good way of doing it?
Absolutely. That's a really good way of doing it. And also to keep in mind that sometimes a certain revenue, like a grant, for example, may be awarded once during the year, not each month. So you could get a lump of revenue at the beginning of the year or during the year, and have expenses to offset it. And sometimes you'll only see expenses and no revenue. So it's important to know that the timing of when those things come in, and the percentage certainly would help too, like percent of the budget that's spent, or what you're expecting to come in the future.
Okay, say we have one line that is at 50% near the end of the year, and another line that's at 125% of it. But again, this is is there room within the budget, and how do we move it, or how does that normally work?
That's a very good question, Hank. So typically that will happen. I mean, there's always things that will come up, and you'll have variances throughout the year where you may have some revenue that's higher than expected, or you'll have one expense that's higher than expected and another expense where the full amount of the budget hasn't been spent. But that really has to, the board should look back to policy and see how those things can, how the money can be moved around. And typically, if one budget line is underspent and another is overspent, it can be done by a board motion, that you can move money from one expense line to another one, or to amend the budget, but it would be done by board motion.
Let's see. Wow, that's great. I don't know what else to say. This is a great discussion so far, and I just think that budget, there's just more that needs to be done. I don't know what else I can ask. So,
well, maybe I could throw in a couple of random questions.
Okay.
So the amount of detail, the number of lines in your budget. So say a collections line. Some libraries have a line that just says collections. Some libraries have several lines. They may have, children's books, adult books, e-resources, magazines. Who decides how that's going to be done, and what recommendations would you have, Renee, about something like that?
Thanks. So that's a really good point. Internally for the library, it may be very important for the library to know within the various collections how much money there is within the overall budget for, like, the children's library section, how much they have for collections, materials, budget, and so forth. But for the board, they may only want to know what the total collections budget is. So really that should be a question for the board as to how much detail they would like to see within the budget. So internally at the library level, they probably need that level of detail, but the board may not want to see that level of detail. So you should really just ask the board that question.
I do have one little addition to that, and that's here in Hinton, I'm pretty sure we actually have a collection development policy that goes along with it. And so if our library manager is following that policy like he's supposed to be doing, then we seem to have no issues with that. We'd rather just know the number of what it is, because that's nice, and that he's following the proper procedures to that we're actually in the policy. So
that's a good point, Hank. I think to wrap this up, and again, you two may have comments on this, but the thing for the board to remember is that this is taxpayers' money. right? However it comes to the library, whether it comes from the province, it comes from the municipality, or it comes, you know, from fines or room rentals, it's all coming from the same source. And that's the, you know, people in your community. And so it's the board's obligation and the board's commitment to make sure that that money is being spent to achieve the goals of what the library is supposed to be doing. You know, it's so you can't just like randomly save it or randomly spend it. It really does have to be committed, because the board are stewards of somebody else's money. So it's that this is part of that task of making sure that you apply the resources to the goals. And I know that everybody worries about money being tight. The thing to remember is what money does is it tells you how fast you're going to reach your goals. So if you have more money, you get there faster. If you have less money, you get there slower. But it's making sure that you're getting that value. There is a handout that accompanies this video that's available from the Alberta Library Trustees Association website that gives you some examples of what we've been talking about today, some examples of budget notes, some budget planning documents, some things that are available to help you. If you have questions, they can be directed to president at, I'm going to get this wrong again, president@librarytrustees.ab.ca, and those questions will get some attention and get answered. And so finally, I'd like to thank our speakers today for a fireside chat without a fire, for having a conversation about money. So thank you both very much.